Okay, everyone? We ready to go? Okay. We're ready to get started with the meeting. If we could get some quiet in the crowd there. Nice to
Recording in
see you all
progress.
here. This is a incredibly record attendance for the Planning Commission. So, I would like to mention up front that if you want to speak tonight, you need to fill out a speaker card, which are back there, and give it to, who does it go to? Stephanie over there, and indicate which item you want to talk about, I presume. Most of you are here for the public hearing. And I think we're ready to get started. One thing I'd just like to say before we do quorum, congratulations to planning. Our housing element has been approved. So it's been a haul. Well done. Okay, let's call the meeting to order. And Stephanie, could you establish a quorum, please?
Yes, Commissioner Disney.
Here.
Commissioner Beninato.
Here.
Commissioner Doran is absent. Commissioner Roach.
Here.
Commissioner Steinle.
Here.
Vice Chair Ahi.
Here.
And Chair Mensinger.
Here. Okay, thank you. We have a quorum. Okay, the first item is any public comment for items not on the agenda. So if it's something that isn't listed, you have welcome to make a public comment. Just come to the lectern if you'd like to. Okay. Then we're moving to the consent calendar, and we need to approve the Planning Commission minutes from August 3rd. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Second?
I'll second.
Okay. Could you take a vote?
Actually, I have
Oh.
a comment.
Okay.
So, under the action, it says, upon a motion by Commissioner Doran, seconded by Commissioner Steinle, the commission recommended approval of the project. Do we call that a project? Weren't they ordinance amendments? I'm just curious, like, why was it written that way in the minutes?
Yes, we would consider it a project.
It was?
Is that the standard language when we do through
Yes.
this?
Yeah, so
Correct.
under CEQA, it would still be classified as a project. So the language can be used interchangeably, so we would still stick with project.
And then is there a reason why we can't, like, attach to the minutes the actual motion or resolution?
I'm not sure what you're asking, because the council action on the ordinance will be, that will be the final ordinance that will be codified. So,
I think also we do action minutes. so
yeah,
I'm
and
not
we
sure
do, and we
that's
do
typically
action
would be
minutes, so
included in
I
action minutes.
don't know what the purpose of attaching it to the minutes would be.
Well, so people know what the motion was, that, so it's clear what the vote was on.
What does the, I don't have the minutes, I have everything else. What is the, what does,
It says action upon a motion by Commissioner Doran, the commission recommended approval of the project. And I guess it's maybe clear to everyone here, but I thought it would make sense to just provide the resolution that I think we voted on. Right, it's in the agenda packet, that's true.
But it
You
wa-
could go to the agenda.
it was an ordinance.
It seemed to me like
Wasn't it?
before we went into something that happened at a meeting, and so maybe it would make sense to have that in the minutes. That was just a comment I had.
So I think if the commission wants to make a recommendation and it's supported by the majority, what you could do is request that the previous agenda item title be included at the beginning of the action and then followed by the language that's provided as proposed. So we would add the title followed by what is already stated as the action.
Thank you. I think that was, so is that friendly amendment, acceptable?
Searching for it in the agenda report, they can look for item 2 or item 3 or whatever.
Yeah, I think just specify which agenda and which item number, and that
Yep.
should be fine.
Yeah, exactly.
Because all the agendas are online as well, so. Does that work for you?
Yeah, that works for me.
Okay. Okay, so we have a motion and a second. Can we take a vote?
Commissioner Disney,
Aye.
Commissioner Beninato,
Yes.
Commissioner Roach,
Yes.
Commissioner Steinle, Vice Chair Ahi, and Chair Mensinger.
Yes.
Unanimous.
Okay, next is our public hearing on zone text amendments implementing the sixth cycle housing element. Because there are so many people here, and I imagine some on Zoom as well, I just want to kind of briefly explain how public hearings are typically done and how we're going to make a small tweak tonight. Normally what happens is there is a staff report, and then the commissioners ask questions. Then we have public comments. Then there might be comments again, either by staff or in the case of someone making an application by the applicant. And then we make comments as opposed to questions. A couple things are going to be a little different tonight. We have one commissioner who does have to recuse himself for part of the discussion because he is a neighbor of Rancho. And so we're going to kind of have to be very careful that he is not involved in those discussions. So for our first set of questions after the staff report, it can only be general questions about the staff report, nothing site-specific, because Commissioner Beninato cannot participate in that. Okay? So with that, anything else, Jolie? Did I?
And then you'll go to public comment?
Yes.
Well, then, no, and then Mr. Beninato is going to recuse himself. No, he's
He
going to
can be
listen to
here for
public
public
comments.
comments, and
And then when
then-
you come back to deliberate, he leaves and
For
then
that
he'll-
portion of
yeah.
the meeting, but he can vote on the other items, and there are 10 of them, so. Okay, so with that, let's start the public hearing, and staff, let's have the staff report.
All right, so good evening, Planning Commission. So tonight's meeting, we are here to discuss a housing element implementing ordinance. Excuse me, like I said, it was for the City Council tonight. Obviously, we're here at the Planning Commission. So as a background, and actually, I do want to somewhat, before I actually dive in even to this slide, because I've seen all of the public comment that has been received and read through everyone's written correspondence, and I appreciate that. I do want to clarify, because I do believe that there's a misconception that tonight we are here to review a housing development for a proposal on Rancho Shopping Center. There is not a proposal that has been submitted to the city for Rancho. And so there is no project that would be decided tonight. This is for implementing ordinances of regulations that are tied to our 6-cycle housing element. But just so that everyone in the room does understand, is that there is no actual action related to a physical construction project proposal for the site. So with that, I'm going to dive back into the presentation. And so a background for the community is that on January 24th of 2023, the City Council adopted the 6-cycle housing element. Contained within the adopted housing element are various programs. And if anybody has read over the staff report, that's what we're here to discuss, is 5 of those implementing ordinances as contained. So I'm going to provide a housing element overview since this ordinance is being facilitated by the requirements contained within it. So a housing element is a component of the city's general plan. Each city must plan for its fair share of housing, which is something that is allocated to each jurisdiction every 8 years. As a part of that 8-year cycle is, and right now we're currently in our 6th cycle, is it's how the jurisdiction will cover its housing needs and construction to facilitate that production of housing within the city. This is something that is required of us and enforced by California Department of Housing and Community Development, which a lot of times you'll see in the news, HCD for the acronym, which reviews and actually approves our housing element. As the chair previously said, is we actually obtained final certification from the state for our housing element earlier this week. So with this, I do want to kind of cover, because I know there was a lot of questions about when this actually was started. So the city of Los Altos actually started the housing element process in August of 2021. So 2 solid years ago. And throughout the course of all of this, we have had various public meetings, workshops, pop-up events, as well as done a thorough environmental analysis, and then also releasing the public review draft, which was released last year in June 2022. And then bringing us to our adoption, which happened in January, and then final concurrence, which was just recently issued to the city. So prior to this, as I mentioned, is we had various community engagement efforts that were actually accomplished during the housing element process. There was a dedicated housing element website, which is still live on the internet, 6 pop-up events, 30 resident small groups, advertisements in the town crier, newsletters and constant contacts, over 150 people which subscribed to those letters, 2 community workshops and open houses, and flyers sent directly to residents, as well as 8-foot by 3-foot banners, which were posted at 3 locations in the city of Los Altos for 3 months.
Never got a flyer.
I would just like to remind the public that we have a ordinance regarding public conduct at public meetings. And you will be warned. And if you continue to have disruptive conduct, the chair can ask you to leave. So we don't hiss, we don't boo. This is not a debate. And it has nothing to do with speech. It's about your conduct. And if you continue to interfere with the public meeting, you will be warned and you will be asked to leave.
So I will go and further backtrack. It was not a flyer that was sent to every individual house in the city of Los Altos. So moving forward is the housing element requirements. There's three main requirements that's a part of the housing element, which is goals, policies, and programs. These three things are what shapes the way that the city will accommodate its fair share of the housing allocation. So the goals and policies. So one of the things that I previously mentioned was these two components. So goal number 3 of the housing element is to remove constraints to the development of housing. And further, then it drills down to the policies, which the two most significant to the ordinances as well as the programs that subsequently follow is policy 3.1, which is to promote housing through city regulation and to promote housing goals through city codes, ordinances, policies that enable housing production. Policy 3.2 is to modify zoning code to assist in meeting housing needs, ensure that zoning code provisions assist in meeting the housing needs of residents, including those with special needs. So what is a program? The adopted 6-cycle housing element contains several programs. Each program establishes action items that the city will take to implement this document further. Each of the programs include 5 main components. The first being an overview of the topic, then specific steps that the city will take in order to implement, the time frame of which the item shall be completed by, funding sources, if applicable beyond just city funding, and then the specific quantified objective of what the city accomplishes by virtue of implementation. So jumping into the 5 programs that are a part of the ordinance that is before the Planning Commission tonight, which is a program 3B, which is to modify building heights in mixed-use zoning districts. This was something that was originally left without specific numbers when we first submitted this document to the state for review. In subsequent revisions and instruction by the state, we were required to provide explicit height increases for the subsequent zoning districts to allow for the potential of future housing development. The state further required the city to use previously identified heights that were from the downtown vision plan, which are what is subsequently in bullet points on this slide, for further implementing action in order to address the housing needs. The program further continued is that the city was required to be able to provide a specific minimum height increase to the commercial neighborhood district, which is a minimum of 10 feet to whatever is existing as of today. Program 3C is to explicitly remove the floor area ratio restriction at Rancho Shopping Center and Woodland Plaza. The existing FAR limitation is at 0.35, and this was to be removed for those 2 specific districts as they are the only 2 that have that specific provision against it in the zoning code. Program 3F was to reduce the conditional use permit requirements of the residential mixed use and multifamily. This was to further facilitate housing, and the city is to amend the code to allow for the residential mixed use in CN, CD, CRS, CT, CRS, OD to allow for multifamily and mixed use by right. Program 3G was to also further amend conditional use permit findings that are applicable to housing developments. So as a part of this requirement is that when conditional use permits are applicable within the code is that those had to be streamlined into further allowing for guaranteed housing production on sites in the mixed use districts. Program 3N was to modify standards in the R3 zoning districts. This is to allow heights with a minimum of 35 feet and 3 stories. The city is required to do such in order to be able to make sure that maximum densities are achieved within those districts. So to further explain, since, and this is something that is in our adopted housing element verbatim, is that since Los Altos is generally built out and does not have much vacant land, non-vacant sites will comprise a substantial portion of the sites, which include commercial and mixed-use zone parcels that allow residential uses. And they were analyzed for the redevelopment and the potential using the ratio of improvement to land value and the relationship of the improvement value to land, which is widely accepted and an indicator of property utilization, whether redevelopment potential exists. This is one of the main metrics that the state of California requires us to apply for any jurisdiction throughout the state of California. It's a part of the standard formula when determining if a site is applicable for the site inventory. Additional indicators of redevelopment potential is age of structures, recent alterations and improvements to structures or overall site beyond cosmetic or individual tenant improvements. So those two provisions do not get factored into whether a site has had recent alterations or improvements. And then also vacancy rate or tenant turnover. So further to clarify, since the community, I also saw some of the comments, I do want to at least acknowledge that the existing code does allow for the commercial neighborhood district to allow residential and mixed-use development. It is not zoned for only commercial. So further, I do want to just specifically acknowledge, because I know the general consensus and concern is with our Rancho Shopping Center in the site inventory, is as obviously I think the community saw very clearly, is that the floor area ratio of the 0.35 has to be removed. I did want to at least provide an acknowledgement to the legislative history at the local level, is that the FAR limitation was placed on the property in 1989. Prior to that, there was not an FAR limitation on the site. The intent that is identified in the meeting minutes from the May 9th, 1989 meeting was to control future commercial growth. And then to specifically at least acknowledge the site characteristics of the parcel is that it is a 6-acre parcel. The age is from the 1950s, so prior to city incorporation is when the majority of the site was broke ground and then finished prior to and then during the very early stages of city incorporation. And then what is called ILV is the improvement to land value, which is 0.59. Now, what the community also has acknowledged or has been talked about is that the city intended to rezone this in order to facilitate the creation of 200 plus units. That is, yes, by taking the simple math of what is a calculation based on the land area. However, as adopted in the housing element, the city only counted on a realistic unit calculation for potential growth and development of the site to include 82 units. So that's about a third of what the maximum is that the city actually intended on, just based on the community input in virtue of certain site constraints of potential redevelopment. So another concern that has been raised in the community is that if we do away with the FAR or any other of the provisions that have been proposed and directed by our adopted housing element, is then how do we mitigate those issues? In 2021, the city adopted objective design standards, which took a very rigorous process, and outside consultants were brought in order to help facilitate that community discussion and the ultimate overall design of what those standards were to include. Standards that are adopted and codified, specifically, this is actually looking at the subsections that are in the CN zoning district zoning code, is building placement, building massing and articulation, the upper story step back, so that means pulling back each upper level further and further. So essentially, if you're located next to R1, for example, you would have to step back your building in order to further break up the massing away from the adjacent single-family district. There's also provisions that explicitly require vertical articulation, horizontal articulation, adjacencies of design facades specific to anything facing the R1 zoning districts, privacy and line of sight, roof line and roof design, building design for pedestrian scale entrances, window design, building materials, ground level open space requirement, landscaping, paving, and pedestrian amenities, site circulation and access, and service areas and screening. So all of these provisions are things that are already built within the zoning code in order to be able to help mitigate and address any potential new associated impacts with a higher intensity or density of development at the site. So to further also explain to the community is what is at risk when we talk about the rezoning and the implications of not potentially implementing our housing element is if people have seen local newspapers is the term builder's remedy, or often referred to as a zoning vacation, which was established in the Housing Accountability Act of 2017. This is something that means that if a housing element is not found to be in compliance, which you could subsequently be not in compliance if you do not implement the programs in your housing element, the city or the state removes your certification of the housing element, which means you are now in builder's remedy of a zoning vacation, where the city then has no applicable zoning standards to be able to defend ourselves against any applications received by private developers. So if we were to not implement some of the housing programs that are in our housing element, we are subject to losing certification of our housing element, which then means we are subject to the zoning vacation, where if an applicant were to come in with an application, the application is deemed complete upon receipt, and we have no applicable zoning standards. That includes height. That also includes parking and applicable setbacks. The only thing that the city can enforce is density limits. So another topic that was brought up by the community, and I want to at least address this because I do know that this is something that obviously is shared throughout California, is about the potential environmental impacts associated with any type of project. So anytime a staff report is published, the staff report in and of itself either is exempt or not from CEQA. Tonight's action is exempt from CEQA under the general provisions of the California Environmental Quality Act. Furthermore, though, the city, as a part of the housing element, had to complete a full environmental analysis. In that, the city was able to utilize the Mitigated Negative Declaration, or an MND. That was adopted on January 24th, 2023. So further, the implementing regulations is also covered under the MND that was adopted earlier this year. However, one of the very important caveats is future environmental analysis will be required for potential development throughout the city. This is specific for project-specific analysis. This is something that would cover traffic impacts that would be reviewed on a project-by-project basis, such as vehicle miles traveled and associated impacts for the general site. So there is potential future environmental analysis that would have to be conducted for Rancho specifically, if that was what the community was inquiring about. Further, one of the things that I've already touched on is the penalties for non-compliance. So it's actually more so than just losing our certification and then being subject to builder's remedy. So there's also financial penalties. So if you are found to be in non-compliance and your housing element is what is called decertified, courts can apply financial penalties by a factor of 6 if a housing element is not in compliance. further legal lawsuits and attorney fees from lawsuits from housing right organizations and developers and HCD, so directly by the state. Additionally, and a really big one that does impact a lot of local jurisdictions is the loss of state funding and sources such as grants for local transportation improvements, so SB1. And the regional transportation funding. So this is the things that we usually fund the majority of our street improvements with, is we would not be eligible for funding until we're brought back into compliance. So we could potentially, depending on if and when we were to lose our certification status, we potentially could miss out on an entire year worth of SB1 funding allocation. And then also a big one is the loss of permitting authority through general plan inadequacy. So if the general plan, or specifically as we're talking as it relates to these implementing ordinances, is a housing element is a component of one of 7 required elements in the state of California. If the housing element is determined to be decertified for housing law noncompliance, our entire general plan is then deemed inadequate by a court, and we do not have the right as a local jurisdiction to permit anything within the city of Los Altos for land use regulations. And so you lose that and you enter into court receivership until you actually come into compliance and have a legally, lawfully adhering housing element. So one of the things that I'll acknowledge, and this has been going on since the January 31st due date for the housing elements, is a petition for writ of mandate. And these have been advocated by some specific nonprofit agencies or groups, the California Housing Defense Fund and the Yes in My Backyard. These two entities have active legal action filed with the courts, most closely the city of Cupertino, Martinez, Pleasant Hill, Daly City, Belvedere, Novato, and a bunch more. These are only the ones that were at the early part of the year, and there have been more since added. And then something to also mention is that those petitions of writ of mandate were actually brought against jurisdictions for either not adhering to adoption of their housing element by the January 31st timeline, or for not implementing the adopted required programs of the housing element. So with that, the draft ordinance that is before the Planning Commission does incorporate key components into the Los Altos zoning code, and the draft ordinance accomplishes 5 of the programs required. So after tonight, the next steps would be that the first reading will actually occur on September 26th, and then the second reading would happen on October 10th. The staff recommendation would be to provide, or the commission provides staff with a recommendation on the draft ordinance regarding the housing element and the implementing ordinance as proposed. And with that, I'm available for questions of the commission.
Thank you, Nick. Do any of the commissioners have questions? Remember, not site-specific, more general about the ordinance proposals. Yes, Joe.
So I just have some general questions around builder's remedy for Director Zorns. So if we don't implement this ordinance, at what point are we subject to builder's remedy? Like, is there a lengthy court process? Is it, as of X date, because that's the date we committed to in the housing element? What is the process for being in, quote, builder's remedy?
So the actual process would be that, so further, I can also elaborate is, so HCD has proactive enforcement authority, which was granted to them about 2 years ago. So if HCD as an agency learns that we have not implemented a program as adopted, they have the ability to bring enforcement action against us without complaint. It previously used to be a complaint-based driven agency, and that has since changed. there can also be a complaint filed that we did not adhere to a program as adopted. So if that were to happen, we would receive, if we were not to implement a program as adopted and a complaint or a proactive action is taken against the city, HCD issues a notice of violation that can be as short as 30 days to come into compliance or as great as 60 days, which is 30 days is a very tight timeline from date of receipt in order to be able to essentially overturn a prior action or lack of action. And 60 days is also still a tight timeline to be able to do a double hearing essentially. So with that is that we could be susceptible to builder's remedy with anywhere between, I would say, 30 days to 90 days. And then coming into compliance is we would have to have the ordinance come into full adoption, which is then from the date of whenever we get it noticed, an additional 4 to 5 weeks. So we are looking at being susceptible to builder's remedy from anywhere between 30 to 120 days.
Great. I just have two more, because I really want to understand the impact of this on our neighborhoods as if this were to happen, which my understanding is we were in builder's remedy up until this week when HCD approved, our housing element. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Okay. So two examples. One is a hypothetical shopping center in a neighborhood. If we're in builder's remedy, is it true that like a developer could come in and put up a 10-story building with no setbacks and whatever they wanted to do? Is that in the realm of possibility?
Yes, the only development standard or land use control that is applicable still is the density threshold established in the general plan.
And similarly, in an R1 district, which is single-family home, if we were in builder's remedy, what could someone put up next door to my single-family home if we were in builder's remedy? Anything?
Conceivably, someone could build a 3-story single-family home in a single-family district.
So three is the limit, or?
No, I mean, it could be anything. I'm just saying conceivably because the community has had issues before with just 2 stories, but 3 stories would be something that would be open table. Also, I would have to alert the community as single-family overlay zones would not be enforceable during a non-compliant housing element.
Could someone put 8 apartments on the lot next door to me?
If the density threshold based on the size of the actual lot allows for it, yes.
Okay. That's all my questions. Thank you.
You said 82 units could be constructed, hypothetically. Was that assuming that Rancho Shopping Center is gone, the commercial area?
So the 82 units. Oh yeah, that's true. Sorry, thank you. Yeah, we have to skip that specific question so that the commissioner can recuse himself.
Okay. If one of the amendments, I'm not sure if there's the fine line there. If one of the amendments is not approved today, can it be taken out of can we reject one of them and approve everything else? Or is?
Oh,
Mike.
your mic. It is. You might need to move it
Can
closer.
we, if one of the amendments on the proposed today is rejected and the rest of them are approved, can we proceed with that? And then because the amendments have a 24-month or till December 24th timeline, can we go ahead with that?
So we could bifurcate what moves forward by the commission's majority vote. However, we have stringent deadlines that are within the housing element and various other programs beyond the ones that are just being implemented through the ordinance in the draft tonight. So it further compacts and creates a tighter timeline for everything else. And we have to maintain compliance the entire time so we're not susceptible to anything else previously mentioned tonight. So it wouldn't be ideal to not proceed with it as it potentially would be a tight timeline and risk of not adhering to it.
Can I just ask a clarifying question on what he mentioned? So if we were to bifurcate it and put it off, if we still have to approve it to not be in noncompliance?
That is correct.
So it's a timing issue, it's not a substantive issue.
Correct. Just don't hold it down.
And also you would need, after this gets implemented, then we have to come back with development standards, and that is also built in. So there's the overall housing element, and then the implementation, and then it just keeps getting more and more focused on how we actually have the implementation down to more of a granular level. So there will be more actions on top of this, so.
I think you have a
I
question on this
but
point.
what do you mean by that? I mean, what do you mean by development standards beyond what we're looking at tonight?
You want to take that there? These aren't, this isn't development standards.
No, well, it
It is-
is in regards to the removal of the FAR and that we're implementing the height. But there's other specific things that the commission does have purview over in the future to incorporate additional amendments for further refining what is defined in each individual zoning district. So tonight, what the majority that is being implemented is the removal of FAR limitations, the increasing of height as defined within the housing element, and then moving the allowed use from a conditionally allowed use to a permitted use, which is also further required in the housing element. So there is minor tweaks and modifications to where things are certain being placed, and then the development standards, those two significant ones of the height, and then the FAR removal.
The development standards are in here, we're just not modifying them. The proposal is not to modify them.
Not yet.
Correct.
But they're there. Those are they're in these chapters of the zoning code. I mean, we're looking at them. They're not redlined. And so the proposal is not to modify those. Am I getting that right, or is there some other?
Correct. The program doesn't require modification of them. So the program, in order to maintain compliance, we do have development standards already that exist for the CN district as well as all of the other districts that are associated as a part of this amendment process. But if we further want to create additional objective standards that can be applied unilaterally to all parcels within a district, that is allowed, but that's not a part of what our commitment is in the housing element.
Okay, thank you.
So, sorry, to
Slide down
go
some
on
there.
that, it's entirely possible that we could, projects later on. I don't wanna say the project.
District specific.
District, so not site specific.
Site specific is what we inevitably have run into, obviously, with Rancho and Woodland Plaza being two site specific FAR limitations.
Okay, but anything additional to that, we can do?
Not site specific, so district specific to the CN district.
Okay. Cause in the packet, it says that there
Mhm.
that could be created.
Mhm.
So we could create specific guidelines for Rancho
Mhm.
later on.
But yes, further. However, the one thing though that I'm going to talk about, or why I covered the objective design standards, is so in 2021 we adopted objective design standards that the city spent nearly $500,000 on with an outside consultant to develop those design criteria. We actually have, and the city has not had a single project that has been applied under objective design standards. Everything that has recently been approved in the last 2 years since adoption of the objective design standards were projects that were vested into the previous code. So there is no project that has been built yet in the city of Los Altos under the objective design standards that were specifically crafted to address and mitigate multiple concerns that have been brought up by the community as well as the Design Review Commission and the Planning Commission previously.
We need to stick away from Rancho.
I know.
Nick, I have one question, just to write something down. Who initiates the project?
A private developer.
Does the city have the power to initiate development of any property? Am I on or off? Oh, sorry. Sorry,
Can
I
you
was
repeat
off.
it so that?
Yeah. Does the city have the ability to initiate the development of any property?
Not for housing units, only a public facility.
Right. So the owner of the property or a developer working for the owner of the property would be the one to initiate it?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Are there currently objective standards for Rancho and Woodland?
There is but specifically, I'll answer it in the direction of the CN district has multiple pages worth in the CN district for objective design standards, which are the 15 bullet points that I listed out are verbatim the subsection titles that are adopted into the CN district, which happened 2 years ago.
And I just have one clarifying question, just to make sure I've got this right. If we were to fall into builder's remedy, the objective standards do not apply. And so someone could basically do, to some extent, anything they wanted,
Up to the density.
up to the density.
Exactly, that is correct. So no setbacks, no height, no directional requirements, any facade requirements that is generally what we refer to as our kind of community character. So any of the requirements that we have lawfully established within the code in 2021, everything would go out the window and we would be subject to whatever design a developer would want to place on a site.
And so is it fair to say that should we be in, the only way to sort of protect development going forward with the objective standards is if we are in compliance with the housing element?
Correct.
Okay, is that it for commissioners? Then,
I-
oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, it's,
Oh, you're off now.
oh, I'm off now, okay. I just wanted to clarify.
Can you pull it closer to
We're
you?
we're not proposing any changes to density.
That's correct.
And so the objective here is to change the lot coverage and the height so that builders can achieve the maximum density.
That is correct. I'll at least cover an informational thing since there's so many residents within the chamber. The city of Los Altos is, so this is my fourth housing element in the state of California in the last 3.5 years. This is the first jurisdiction I've been a part of that has actually not had to rigorously increase the density maximums that are already adopted within the general plan. We, however, though, have what would be considered overly restrictive impediments to the creation of housing because our development standards do not allow for maximum densities to be achieved. So realistically is that things such as the FAR or the height limit for various districts throughout the city do not allow for maximum density, even though our general plan land use does allow for a higher density than could be achieved on a site. So we actually just have to modify our development standards to allow for what the general plan land use element already designates.
Is there anything about this process that would prevent the city from putting in a density limit?
Yes, we are not allowed to reduce density for any sites unless we significantly upzone essentially another area within the city. So further, also the community understands is that beyond the major mixed use and commercial zoning districts that were identified in the housing element, the only land area remaining is the R1 zoning district. We have nowhere else to place housing within the city of Los Altos. So in order to maintain the community character of single family neighborhoods, which was the number one requested comment that was received during the housing element process the last 2 years, was to protect and preserve the R1 district to the best of our abilities. And so that is why the city was as careful as possible with selecting everything that was able to stay out of the R1 zoning districts.
I had one more, Susan. So, Director Zorns, how many units did the state HCD say that we have to develop in this cycle of the housing element?
1,958.
So the decision was made through that process if we're not going to do anything to R1, to focus on the larger developments where, either along El Camino or San Antonio or other places where there's greater density could achieved without putting apartment buildings in R1 district as an example. Is that accurate?
Yes. Additionally, I'll at least acknowledge is that the city of Los Altos is within the mid to high 70% of all land area in the city is zoned for single family use or for open space. So that leaves a residual of approximately a quarter of the city if you were to add it all up together. The city has existing units as of today is just over 10,000 housing units. So we are essentially expected to produce another 20% of our existing units on top of what we already have when we only have 25% land area left available.
Got it. Thank you.
And Nick, one more clarifying. We're required to create the incentives or to change things such that it's possible to build the 1,958 units. But that doesn't mean they absolutely will get built. We just are making the conditions in there that it's possible to do it.
That is correct. So we have to create the regulatory framework
Right.
and environment for the potential of new housing units to be created.
And if for whatever reason, whether it's economic conditions, whatever, those aren't built, are we penalized for that if we have created the framework to allow it to happen?
Not as long as we have created the framework.
Okay, thanks. Okay, I think now we're going to open it for public comments. If you could please fill out a speaker card if you haven't and put it over here, that would be great. We also, if you're interested on Zoom, Stephanie, what's the best way to identify themselves?
To hit the raise hand button.
Okay,
Typically
if
at
you're
the
on
bottom of the
Zoom and would
screen.
like to speak, if you could raise your hand button, we're going to have you manage this, Stephanie, because I can't see that.
Correct. So would you like to take the Zoom first?
No, let's take the people who are sitting here first. So how many speaker cards do we have?
Seven.
Okay, and how about on Zoom? How many hands raised?
Currently 3 hands.
Okay. So we'll have 2 minutes for every speaker, and if you could come to the lectern, could we call them in groups of 3 such that everyone's ready to go?
Sorry?
Can we call them up in groups of 3, or you can give
Yeah,
them to me and
so-
I'll call them up in groups of 3? And then, that way we'll just be pretty efficient at this. So the first 3 will be, and forgive me if I pronounce your name incorrectly, John Dashking or Pashking, Mark Leonard, and Jennifer Lance. If you could come up to the podium. And you each will have 2 minutes.
My name is John Daisy.
Oh, not even close. I apologize.
No problem. And I want to say, Commissioner Disney, you were on the DRC last time, the design review, last time 20 years ago. My wife and I were in front of you on our proposed house that we eventually built.
And you are an awesome architect.
I also want to thank Mr. Norris for in-depth description and sort of history and that explain what sort of is at stake here. If we which should affect the Rancho Shopping Center. So, proceed?
Yeah, so we're going to allow you to restart because it sounds like there's a lot of back and forth. So I'm going to advise the commission is they have 2 minutes. The 6 commissioners should not interact with the public speaker because he's already probably exhausted close to half of his time. And so all 6 commissioners can hear whatever public comments, even if it's associated site specific with Rancho and Woodland Plaza. Commissioner Bernardo will have to recuse himself from any vote or action that would be taken on the proposed ordinance. But that doesn't prevent him from actually listening to whatever comments are made.
And we in general do not respond to public comment
Yeah.
during the time, so let's restart.
And just one additional comment, if you have a written presentation, you have something that you don't get through, you can also submit it to the city to be part of this record. So that's how you also get more information in front of the city as well.
I wanted to urge you not to restrictions, removing that restriction from Rancho, and for 3B on the height limit. Because if those two items pass, it is guaranteed the fact that the Rancho Shopping Center will cease to exist. It'll be scraped to the ground, and a new three-story, most probably a three-story flat roof building will be there, covering up most of the land that's there. It'll probably have retail on the first floor, 2 floors of housing on top, with 2 or 3 layers of parking garage underneath it. So it's going to be a drastic change. And what concerns me the most is the loss of Rancho Shopping Center. I'm not saying that in terms of the convenience of it, but from an historical and a neighborhood landmark. The name Rancho Shopping Center comes from the Rancho land grants, the Mexican land grants, for this area that Los Altos was based in. The neighborhood is referred to as the Rancho neighborhood. It is those buildings, that Rancho history and heritage and construction, it's a starting point for those. Organization designed for a shopping center. It was the first of its kind, so it has historical significance not just to Los Altos, but throughout the state. It also it is served as a context for our neighborhood, called the Rancho neighborhood. It's like a community center. It's a landmark. It's a symbol of what that neighborhood was like. It's been there longer than the city has been here. And I just would hate to see that loss. That's what really strikes me most. So what I would like is recommend if we can not approve that to pass on to council, but to take another look at those 2 items, see if there's a way of amending the housing policy to, we have a year's time, if I understand things correctly, to maybe look at an amendment to
We need to wrap it.
to make Rancho Shopping.
Okay, thank you. Mark Leonard?
Hi, good evening. My name is Mark Leonard. I live on Berry Avenue behind the Rancho. I remember when the Rancho Shopping Center was built in 1947. Our house was built in where we live now. The Rancho as a neighborhood was designed by the Wilder Company. He had the idea of a shopping center which the Wilder family continued to own, but they sold 49 houses. And the idea was that there were people that were within easy walking distance of most of what they bought. That plan was made, and it's worked quite well for the last 75 years. That long? Yeah. Anyway, Wilder recognized the social, environmental, and financial advantages. We still get most of our groceries from Andronicos. We meet our neighbors when we walk to and from Starbucks, or the mailbox in front of the UPS store. There's a lot of foot traffic, which is healthy for the neighborhood. I hope that is allowed to continue. Times have changed. We no longer need the camera store. But in a way, it's a mixed-use neighborhood where there's both residential and retail. Even if there has to be some, I would hope that the long-range plan when you have some retail continue at street level, and maybe some residential along that, that's what's necessary to get the necessary. Anyway, if retail at Rancho is lost, there will be a lot more vehicle traffic and stress on downtown parking. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Okay. Jennifer Lance, please.
Good evening. My name is Jennifer Lance. I live on Landy Place in South Los Altos. I have kids who have attended Loyola and Block, and currently attend Block and Mountain View High. I would urge the council not to adopt program 3C because making that zoning change enables the changes that the two prior speakers have mentioned. A terrible mistake. We do need neighborhood scale retail that is walkable and bikeable. Car trips, it adds congestion, but more importantly, Rancho is a place that lots of modes of transportation can use. They can walk. My kids bike there on a regular basis from school, before and after school. Acknowledge there's a need for housing, and you guys have all worked very, very hard on the housing element, for which I thank you very much. But I think we need to be much more thoughtful about what goes in that space. You know, what would replace what is there now will be, you know, if it is high density, it will be worse. It will be worse for all of us by traffic, by congestion, and by the loss of a historic and irreplaceable asset. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, our next speakers are Sonav Agarwal. Okay, sorry, I got that. And then Terry Couture and Meryl Efter.
Hi, I'm Sonal, and I live near the Rancho Shopping Complex in South Los Altos, and I support building affordable housing. Of the shopping center to include housing. Even with the two-stage construction period I saw in the newspaper, just by Mr. Zorns, it's highly likely that key businesses would be unavailable during the period. And given that Rancho Shopping Center holds the majority of small businesses and houses the only grocery store from Almonte all the way to Grant Road, as many have pointed out, nearly everyone in the region visits the complex occasionally, and many who can't drive or prefer to walk depend on Andronicos for all of their daily necessities. And this has some tangible impact that I'd like to highlight. According to a 2016 survey published in the American Journal of Public Health, with each 1 mile shorter distance to a grocery store, participants increased their fruit and vegetable intake by 0.29 servings per day and decreased their BMI Z-score by. In other words, living near grocery stores literally makes you healthier, which is why it's so important that we maintain something. I don't remember when the shopping complex was built, but I do remember doing work in the cafes and having picnics on the grass in the area when I was in high school. Younger students from those such as Loyola also enjoy frozen treats after school at the frozen yogurt. So I'd like to know what steps the government of Los Altos can and will take to ensure that while the old buildings are inevitably demolished and new ones built, the social and commercial needs of the residents.
Thank you. Terry Couture.
Hi, I'm Terry Couture, and I'm on the Park Commission, but I'm speaking as a resident of Los Altos. I feel very sad the legislatures have done this to us. We don't have a choice. Carefully watched. Rancho is a place where all these people go, and I don't want all these people to move. There should be 2 dedicated parking places for each resident. Vehicle entrances should be in height limit of the building should be 35 feet. Buildings should be at least 20 feet And I'm sure there's other things I could think of, but that's all I have right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Merrill Apter.
This is more of a stream of consciousness than anything else. I live on Phillip Road, which is walking distance from Rancho. Some of the questions that I have are, there are new businesses that just moved in. Redwood Grill is one, there's a high-end shoe store. Were they made aware of this? I mean, these people have made long-term commitments to the locations and the community. I'm just curious how they feel about this. I echo the same comments that everyone else had about true community meeting center for kids. Living on Springer and Phillip, the Loyola Grade School traffic, the Loyola Grade School is hundreds of yards from this perceived project. So I'm curious to see how the And the other question I had was, this maybe one that's out there, is the gas station that's been there for 50 or so years. Is there any remediation or anything done there? I hate to see if it's some type of Superfund site where it puts a whole block on the project, or ideally it would block the project, but that gas station's been there a long time, and I'd like to see it as well as for certainly the next generations of Los Altos. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And then we have one more speaker here, and then we'll go to the Zoom ones. Russell Nord.
Thank you. My name is Russell Nord. I'm a resident of Los Altos. I live generally in the Rancho area, but not right next door. I'd certainly like to thank everyone for their hard work on this, and as has been alluded already, many of our hands are tied as the legislature and such. And we're trying to find and have found, to some degree, creative solutions to meet the requirements, but still preserve some of the qualities that make Los Altos unique. And all I would say here is just kind of a general philosophical point that in many communities, when they're special ones, they represent the center of town, the hub of activity, and they kind of are the quintessential elements of that town. And I think we're southern Los Altos, which perhaps has the majority of residents. Downtown Los Altos is nice, but we can't really fill that need as much. Rancho is that center. And there's historical significance there. It's a nice community area. It's quiet, it's safe, it's beautiful. And clearly it's been the subject of a number of comments. There are a number of elements to this piece that were brought up here. But the item that keeps garnering the most attention is Rancho. So I know an unaffected but if we could just take one more crack at this, look at it again, and think creatively about it's a lot less work and effort than trying to deal with the demolition of Rancho. So while it might seem that we're all up to our eyeballs in work and kind of want to be done with this and on to the next thing, I would
Great, thank you. We have one more in-person speaker, Cynthia Carr.
Thanks so much for all your work, I appreciate it. I don't know, so like, can we propose to make it an historical site so that we can't build on it, if that's something that's being considered? And with all the new buildings that are going down in downtown Los Altos, are those considered to be new buildings? That you guys are talking about is also, and also, if you do have to do this, thank you.
I'm going to turn it over to Stephanie to manage the Zoom comments.
Yes.
Oh,
I
I'm
think
sorry.
there's
Oh,
one
I
more
didn't, I
speaker.
didn't get it. So please come up. I am so sorry. And you're,
Jennifer Griffin.
great, thank you.
Yeah.
Please go.
Hi, I live in Cupertino. My grandparents lived on El Monte, and I'm a member of the Methodist Church at Magdalena and Foothill Expressway. I first became when our church wound up on the housing element about a year ago. The minister did not know that it was put on there. Someone alerted them, and it was taken off, thankfully. The housing element list, especially with the Woodhams, the other shopping center. I had a number of concerns. My grandparents used to take us over. They were founding members of the Methodist Church. And we used to go over to Rancho when I was a child and go to the Blintz restaurant every Sunday, and in my little dress with the skirt. But what I was going to say is I'm really concerned. You have, I believe it's the Permanente Creek. It is on the left side of the Rancho property. It goes through, the creek goes, it's either Adobe or Permanente. It goes through the church property and it goes under Foothill, goes into the back, the left side of the shopping center. Have they talked about, that has water in it now. I drove through there. And it's corridor is not harmed, and it might be a potential flooding issue. The gas station, that's the only gas station in the whole area. I'm really concerned about that. I go in there quite often. The traffic impacts, as you know, Springer back there in the back, we used to go to the cobbler that was back there.
Yeah, we
for
need to
New
wrap
Year's.
this, yeah, to be
And
fair.
I'm concerned about the zoning, the density, and I just don't think this is a good place to put housing. Anyway, I know your hands are tied, but I have a very dim opinion of HCD and the government right now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Try again. Stephanie, to you.
Okay, we currently have 5 people on Zoom that would like to speak, so we'll start first with Anne.
So she would be now in the wait now as a panelist, right?
Yeah.
Click on panelist now.
Okay. Okay. So first up is Emma Dorn. Emma, you're on. Please unmute yourself.
Hi, hopefully you can hear me okay.
Yes,
I'm
we can.
Hi everyone. Thanks for all your hard work. I'm Emma Dawn. I live about half a mile from Rancho on Cena Ave. Have 3 kids who go to Loyola, Block, and St. Francis, and we walk to Rancho a whole bunch to shop and dine. I think maybe unlike everyone else who's talked, I'm actually strongly supportive of more housing across the peninsula, in Los Altos, and specifically at the Rancho site. I'm supporting of more housing and of actually allowing that on Rancho for a couple of reasons. I think enabling more housing and especially hopefully affordable housing for teachers, for nurses, for the people who nanny our children, for the people who serve our food, many of whom right now live in RVs or have to commute ridiculous distances or sleep in their cars. Bringing more families and vitality to Los Altos School District. Folks noted that Loyola, all 3 of my kids went to Loyola, is right down the road. Los Altos School District has been suffering declining enrollment. Loyola started at about 600 kids. Well, my oldest daughter started there. It's now, at one point it went down to 300. And so just bringing vitality and more families into the area, I think would be great. I think just given the history as well of the peninsula and the Bay Area, bringing more racial and economic justice and desegregation of our school systems, and this is one step towards that. And then we've talked a lot about environmental review and reducing the environmental impact of all of the people who commute into the Bay Area. There are currently 4.5 jobs per residence in the Bay Area, and it's just not sustainable if we're going to have more livable communities. So I'm looking forward to a new Rancho Shopping Center. I'm excited for a Rancho Shopping Center that enables shopping and also humans and living. Thank you for listening to my comments.
Thank you.
Chair, can we raise the volume on the speakers? It's a little hard to hear over here.
Is that possible, Stephanie? Well, perhaps we can ask them to rate the speaker just to speak up more when it's an issue. Okay, let's go to number 2.
Everything I heard
Oh, you
was
couldn't hear at all?
she was on Cena, that's the only thing I heard.
Okay, because I could hear fine, so,
Yeah, it was quiet, but I could
yeah.
You're younger.
Yeah, it wasn't loud.
Let's go to the next one. We'll see if we can just get them to speak up till we solve the issue.
All right, next up is Vivian. You're on. Please unmute yourself and speak loudly.
Okay, if you can't hear me, put your thumb down and I'll try to speak up. So I agree with
I think we
what-
need, if you could speak up a little more, I'm looking at one end of the
Okay,
table
can
can't
you-
hear.
Okay, can you hear me better now?
You can.
So
Yeah, just come this way.
I'm kind of yelling
We'll get
here.
cozy.
So
Okay.
I agree with the people talking about Rancho being an asset to the neighborhood. And I have to say, I didn't really find out about this until today. I know it says it's been advertised. I don't know if there was a big sign at Rancho, but I feel like there should be a big sign there now showing that something's going to change here and a way that residents can give more impact if we do have to compromise and housing needs to be built there, how we can fit everybody's needs. I think that the green space is an issue and the traffic and safety for kids going to school, bicycles, we really have a problem with that in our area. Obviously, this is not a place housing should be, and that's why it was not zoned that way. High density housing should be closer to where there's public transportation, and that would work better. So I'm not sure, at this point, I know people have looked into it and you have some constraints. But I do hope that residents can be more involved somehow than just putting up signs or mailers. I don't think we got something. Maybe some of it was during COVID. And so just going forward, I'm not sure if we need 2,000 units, how this 80 is going to help so much, and it's going to ruin an area that so many people use. But I just hope we can work together if these if these neighborhood areas need to be impacted. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Who's next?
Next up is Janine Valdez. You're on. Please unmute yourself.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
My name is Janine Valadez, and I'm a Parks and Rec Commissioner, but I'm speaking as a resident today. I'm astounded by anybody that says that they're not aware of this housing element development and all the features of it. I mean, the city has been working on these since 2021. There have been innumerable community meetings, home mailings. The Los Altos Town Crier has talked about this ad nauseum, and there's just no excuse if you are truly invested in Los Altos for not understanding what is going on. I hear complaints about loss of home values. There is zero evidence in Los Altos that subdividing lots, that building denser housing, that any kind of development in terms of retail in any way lowers housing prices or housing sellability. The opposite is true. Even when they take a big lot and subdivide it into smaller lots, those houses sell for more than all the neighboring houses that have larger lots. 3, housing's not inconsistent with retail, service providers, social gatherings. Whatever we develop there will have all of these features. Moreover, the developers will pay huge fees in terms of park in lieu fees that allow us to spend those monies on creating the parks and open spaces that our residents need and deserve. Right now, we're the worst city in the Bay Area when it comes to park square footage per capita. 4, we need more tax income. It helps the city provide better services. 5, We need more kids and young families to support our schools. Declining schools, now that correlates directly with declining home value. So if you want to preserve your home values, we need more kids, more young families in our schools. 6, traffic lights, those are also good for kids. It helps them walk to school. I don't let my kids walk to school because we don't have stoplights. 7, our city has a problem with meeting a big state requirement, which had to do with affirmatively furthering fair.
Was she cut off after 2 minutes? I did
Correct.
not do that.
Correct. And our last speaker, so if anyone else online would like to speak, do please press the raise hand button. As of now, our last speaker is Ann Paulson. Ann, you're on.
Good evening, Planning Commission. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I think it's helpful for all our residents to review how we got here. For this housing element, Los Altos was required to plan for almost 2,000 new homes. We had a long, well-publicized process. It was many months long. There were numerous public meetings and opportunities for public comment. And in fact, there were numerous public comments. Finally, we submitted the housing element over a year ago. We planned for housing all over the city. El Camino, shopping centers at El Camino and San Antonio across from downtown, a downtown parking plaza, other downtown sites, Lucky, Loyola Corners, Trader Joe's Plaza, ADUs, and Rancho. The city legally adopted this plan in January, and this week the state agreed. So now we have a binding contract with the state of California to allow housing at higher densities in the places I mentioned. So what's left here is to do what the city has already promised to do. We promised to allow housing on the sites, and now we're doing it. If we don't do what we agreed to do in a process with plenty of public comment, we'll get sued and we'll be out of compliance and we'll be vulnerable to the builder's remedy. So let's move forward and do what we said we'd do. And as a side comment, a rancho with retail on the first floor and 2 stories of housing above sounds absolutely great. It would be super walkable both for the people who live there and for the neighbors. And I hope it happens. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And that, I think, is it.
Sorry, there is one more
Okay.
speaker. And his name is Dan Cohen. You're on.
Hi. So the local shopping center at Rancho is one of the things that drew us to this neighborhood. We live on Harrington Avenue, about half a mile away. We walk there every day. We have grocery shopping, coffee, ice cream, and we run into neighbors. It gives us a real sense of community, exercise, etc., to be able to walk there. I think any traffic study we look at may not account for the loss of foot traffic when things are too far for people to walk where they're walking today. The traffic is very congested on Springer there. There are 2 lights in a row. It backs up past Berry where kids are going to school. I think it's going to cost the city a lot of money to mitigate the extra congestion there, which will not allow people to get onto Foothill or onto 280. From an environmental standpoint, we have a few heritage oak trees there that I'd be concerned about. And it's not a location that's close to mass transit like trains. I do want to offer a couple of possible solutions. One, the part of Rancho that's on the other side of Riverside, perhaps there could be housing built there that wouldn't impact the current retail space that we have. As another speaker said, maybe we could take another look at other things. Could we add another story to some of the housing units that are going to be built on El Camino, which are also going to be walkable to the train on San Antonio? So thank you very much for your work. I know this is a very difficult issue, but I really hope there's a way to preserve it's really the only community space that we have in the Rancho area, and I hope there's a way that we can keep that. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Stephanie, we done?
Yes. that
Okay, we
is
will
everyone.
close the public comment part of the public hearing then. Nick, did you have anything you wanted to say?
Yeah, Chair, if I could have just, so this is a little bit kind of out of our kind of standard rules of order when it comes
Yeah.
to a public hearing, but since we have a bifurcated vote, I do want to take a chance to at least acknowledge so that the commissioner does make sure, as well as in case any community members were to step out shortly after some of the discussion and votes start happening, a part of each of the appendix attached to the draft ordinance. So ADUs, which was brought up by one of the residents, was curious as do those count? Yes, the city has actually anticipated counting 322 of the required almost 2,000 units to be satisfied through ADU production over the course of the next 8 years. I will say is that myself, as well as the consultants that helped prepare this document, had to rigorously defend that number because it is based off of our ADU production during the 5th cycle housing element. So that number is not something that we can extrapolate further. It's based on the yield that has been produced in recent years. Additionally, there was the comment and question of do downtown units get factored in? Downtown units, as well as any housing units that is considered a net new unit. So if you were to tear down an existing single family home and build one right back, that's a wash. It's 1 for 1. But any new units that are produced within the jurisdiction as a net new do count. However, one of the things that I do want to at least somewhat provide the educational component of this is that our housing or planning period started on January 31st of this year. So anything that has been approved and obtained a building permit prior to January 31, 2023 does not count under the 6th cycle housing element. So that counts towards the 5th cycle allocation, which was, I believe it was around 1,500 units up from memory. But that all counts towards the prior allocation that was provided to us in the 5th cycle. So moving forward, we have to then be able to produce over the 8-year cycle the rest of the units. The other question and concern that at least caught my eye, just to at least be able to provide the information, is Hale Creek, which runs actually between Parma Way and Riverside Drive. Is that creek is actually just by virtue of the parcel where the Los Altos Veterinary Clinic is. The parcel itself is a minimum of 75 feet in depth. Plus a 50-foot street. It's 125 feet from property line or the edge of creek to the edge of the main parcel of Rancho Shopping Center. The requirement for any spatial distance and setbacks from the creek is required to only be 50 feet, and that is consistent with the essentially regulatory water rules in the Santa Clara Valley Water, tributary, all of the fun water agencies. It's a 50-foot required spatial distance, so actually it over double meets for the main parcel of Rancho. So I at least wanted to acknowledge those 3 comments and questions because those are obviously very important to what we do moving forward with any sites as a part of the inventory for the housing element.
Yeah, great, thank you. Okay. Do you want to deal with all the ones other than 3C, so Joe stays, or deal with 3C first and Joe leaves?
No, we're going to ask for Commissioner Beninado to recuse himself now, and we will talk in depth about Appendix F.
Yep. So, Mr. Beninado, I understand that you live within 500 feet of the Rancho Shopping Center, so you will be recusing yourself and leaving the room, and you'll be coming back after we discuss. See, this is real loud, and I don't know why everybody else is not so loud. But you will then come back after we discuss 3C.
Sounds good. So I don't need to make a statement? Great, thank you so much.
Okay, so we're going to deal with these by each of the the different programs. So we are dealing now with Rancho, which is 3C. And which appendix was it? They're actually covered up, the numbers on there.
So it's Appendix F of the
Which is code.
ordinance.
Okay.
So Program 3C, yes, but
Program
we're
3C.
talking about amendments to Chapter 1440.
1440. Okay, and do we take a vote, 2 votes on each one, correct?
What do you mean 2 votes on each
Well,
one?
what do you need from us?
So you guys will discuss this
Right.
and ask any other potential Rancho-specific questions, as we kind of normally would do with any other item. And then we will take a vote of the 5 commissioners. And then Joe Benato will be able to re-enter and join
But there,
the
in the
discussion.
ordinance, draft ordinance, there were several line items, so we're basically going to vote on each line item separately. Is that right?
Well,
we
or
need to-
just, or all together, if there's nothing that needs to be changed based on the red lines from that section of the ordinance, or
Okay.
the draft ordinance.
Okay, great. So would anyone like to kick, oh, I'm
Well, I'd
sorry.
like to just ask some questions.
Okay.
Is
Yeah,
that
that's
okay
fine.
before we
Sure.
have a great, bigger discussion? Okay, so Rancho and Woodland are in this CN zone. And that zone has no density limit, correct? There is no density limit in the CN zone.
No, so there's density thresholds that are set through the land use element of the general plan. There's not any unit size limitation or calculation that's required in zoning. So you technically defer back to the general plan for anything such as density.
So what is the density limit for CN?
Give me 1 second to pull it up.
It's currently 0.35.
Well, what he sent me had no limit, right? So,
Actually, I do apologize. There is not a density maximum for the CN district. That is one of the few districts that have none.
okay, so here's the thing. CN has no density limit. It has no lot coverage percentage on it. It doesn't have any kind of FAR restriction on it, except that Rancho and Woodland have a 35% FAR, kind of like an overlay or an exception for those two areas in the city. And so I'm really concerned here because I'm wondering, how did the 35% come about? And I don't know, right? It was like in the 80s that this was done, you said? And I'm wondering if someone looked at this and said, well, without any density limit, without any lot coverage limit, without any FAR limit, we have to put some limits here because it abuts R1. So let's put a 35% FAR in place to protect the neighborhood and to protect the character of Woodland and Rancho. And so now HCD is saying you can't have a site-specific FAR percentage attached to those two sites. And so now we take it away, and it's kind of like there's nothing to protect that site whatsoever. So without any kind of density limit and the FAR gone, it seems like the sky's the limit, other than that there is a height limit. So that's really concerning. And I wonder, well, how did CN ever get like that? And I think it's because CN stands for commercial neighborhood, right? And the sites tend to be small in downtown areas or in, I'm thinking Loyola, the sites are small. And so the site itself kind of limits how much development can be. And so the height and the size of the lot is really what's limiting kind of the intensity. But you don't have that with Rancho and Woodland because those two sites are quite big, right? They're shopping centers. They're old, like, it's the old shopping center with the surface parking. It's really unique. And so, you take out, that far, and I mean, I don't know, it seems like you could build so much there, it would be quite concerning to me. So I have a question. I guess that wasn't really a question, that was just a comment, but Maris asked a question earlier of Director Zorns about there being a way for us to put something specific in place for Rancho, like specific development guidelines. So can you explain how that would work?
Something as involved as that would have to be at the direction of the city council, as zoning code text amendments are initiated by virtue of council action and then directed towards the planning commission for development. So that's one of the reasons why I covered the objective design standards, is the city went through the very rigorous process of developing those standards already. So in addition, though, is that you can't build 100% on a lot, depending on the way that the property is oriented, unless you essentially have a street in front of you and an alleyway behind you. There is not a public alleyway for the Rancho Shopping Center, and Foothill Expressway is never going to change its main kind of thoroughfare designation under the circulation element. So the requirement is that for the rear yard setback, at bare minimum has to be under the code, is 20 feet from the rear of the property. The rear of the property is what is already the rear as it's oriented today, which backs up to the 8 single-family residences that are essentially immediately behind Rancho. However, Santa Clara County Fire, for any fire access road, when you have a development that would be butting up against an R1 zoning district, will require a fire access road. So technically, by fire code, there will not be any structure or obstruction, even if you want to say it that way, from property line inland measured 26 feet is a dedicated fire access road that has to exist. So for future development, that would have to actually occur. So that would be at minimum a 26 foot buffer from the rear of those properties. Additionally, because we have provisions and requirements for things such as landscaping and lot coverage of things that are associated with non-building development, is that ends up further essentially restricting or kind of chipping away at what your actual building envelope can end up being. So FAR was a guaranteed removal for Rancho Shopping Center as a part of the 6-cycle housing element. So that is one thing that has to be provided as a part of the amendment process tonight.
Can we put in place a density limit?
No, you can no longer restrict or increase density restrictions under SB 330.
But I think that whenever the 35% was put in place, if they had had a crystal ball and if they had known who were going to be here, they might have said, let's put a density limit on those specific sites, because you're saying we don't have to change the density limits. So had they done that.
Yeah, pursuant
No,
to.
we that's right, we can't. But I'm just saying, in the 80s, when they put the 35% there on Rancho and Woodland, could whoever was in charge of that decision, could they have instead said, let's put a density limit on those sites? And had they done that, would we have to remove those density limits today?
So the council action, so potentially, but it depends on whatever they might have done. But that's neither here nor there, because that's not what the action that the council took in 1989. On April 25th, 1989, Mayor Bruno opened the public hearing. No public testimony was received. The public hearing was closed. The following council discussion regarding the value of the ordinance in controlling future commercial growth. So that would not have done anything with density. So the whole intent was to only control future development of commercial growth, not for residential growth. The council action was unanimously passed in 1989. So it was to control, and that's from the meeting minutes that were adopted from that meeting. So it was to only control the potential of commercial redevelopment of that site.
And then SB 330.
Yeah, and then and the city attorney is reminding me is SB 330, which is the Housing Crisis Act of 2019, further compounded where you are not allowed to modify density limits by reduction of the allowed density without making any potential, you'd have to make an immediate swap in any potential area. And as I originally told the city or the community and the commission tonight, that means that we would have to find 6 acres of single family zoning and replace it with unlimited density limits. And effectively, those are already spoken and owned parcels, so HCD would not accept that either. So it has to be, there's size criteria as well as existing use criteria that's factored into your site selection for site inventory. So making a fair swap where some folks might say, oh, well, we'll just do it in the single family districts and we don't really care. Because everything's already subdivided and segmented ownership, that actually creates a path of resistance for the creation of additional housing. And the key to that term is additional housing because we're not providing net new units by doing what we predominantly see in Los Altos, which is single family home reconstruction most commonly.
And then
I'm sorry.
Then SB 330 had a cutoff date that was 6 months or a year before it was implemented, that you could, local agencies could not go in and reduce density prior to its adoption. Mm-hmm. So it even looked back and said the densities that are existing as of March 2000.
Yeah, it was a weird date.
March something 2017, I believe, that you could not go back and rezone and reduce those densities. So so it was like one step ahead of the local agencies. You can't go and lower all these densities prior to it coming into effect.
I also think we need to focus on what the situation is today, as opposed to what it could have been had different decisions been made 40 years ago. So I would just give that one caution.
Okay, so 2 more questions. In the proposal, we're saying that CN, it would be allowed in that zone to have residential only. And that's correct, right? Residential only is allowed in CN according to the proposal. You guys are looking.
Yeah. Yeah, there is the proposal that under the permitted use section is that there could be residential only developments and mixed use developments.
Okay, so can we, would it be allowed or would it be risky for the city to say, no, it can't, these CN parcels cannot be residential only. They have to be mixed use with retail on the ground floor.
We can attempt to do that, yes, and then we might have to modify in at the half year or the half cycle mark. So that would be no later than January 2000 and my dates.
24.
Yeah, no, 27. So 4 years plus the 23. So January 31st, 2027 at the mid-year site or mid-cycle date, if we have not seen a significant amount of housing production as mixed use, we would have to explore the option of further creating the regulatory environment that would influence development to create additional housing.
Okay, and then one last question. I need this data point. So, right, there's no density limit on CN, but for CT, which is El Camino, what is the density limit there? Just as a data point for comparison. Okay, that's what I thought. So El Camino is 38 units per acre. That's the density limit. And of course, there's bonuses for affordable housing, but CN has no density limit and now no FAR limit.
The city has historically applied over 100 units per acre for the CT district, and we have to continue to progress and approve projects at that rate because we've established a pattern of density approval, which has been previously discussed with the city council last year. So actually, the CT district has memorialized almost no density limit because of our prior approval history. And that was further discussed with HCD staff as to why we've been able to support continuing our reliance on CT.
And I believe we're getting rid of the density for CT as part of the housing element.
That's correct.
Yeah. So
Because of our approval history,
Yeah.
is that we've previously acknowledged through the deployment of density bonus, which is not something the city has any discretion of not allowing for a project request. And it's been applied time and time again that has then yielded over 100 units per acre.
Okay, thank you.
So, anybody else like to go?
Well, I would like to add something to what Dawn was saying. The FAR is effectively a density limit also. It's a very blunt instrument, but basically it is a form of density limit. So there is a density limit. And our requirement, our obligation under the current law is to remove any constraint on residential development that we can, period. And that's one of the things we have to, that's why there's basically no density limit left anyplace. And we can't, certainly we can't make it less, and making it higher is wonderful. So we would be forced to do that anyway. I think I'll reserve the rest of my comments for later, but I just wanted to follow up on that one.
Okay, if nobody else, I'll go.
Yeah, I've got questions.
Okay, go ahead, Richard.
I've got a lot of questions.
But let's again focus on what the situation is
Yes.
today, not what it could have been.
And
Thanks.
Commissioner Roche, can I ask you to maybe switch using Joe Benanato's microphone? I feel like yours might not be projecting.
Is that better?
Yep.
Yeah. Now you can hear me. First of all, I like what Kate's idea, if I can say this, the mixed-use concept, because as it is now with residential and commercial, if you have no limit, you're restricted with residential. They're going to build 82 units or whatever they can build, and if they include some low-income housing, they're going to build more. The problem with residential, as I see it, among other things, is you notice you have a 20-foot setback. Maybe it's 26 feet with a fire access, and you have a one-story single family on the other side of that, and then you're going to have a 4-story building, apartment building, that's going to shadow and affect all of those 8 single-family houses that front on Riverside. So the concept of where you place these houses is going to be limited, and it's real restrictive. Again, discussion of the traffic, 2 stop signs now, lots of backup, school, kids. I'd like to see the existing use would be ideal. A mixed use, as Kate brings up, offers an increasingly better option where you would have the shopping center as where we go and get our groceries, and there's a restaurant and stores, as well as being able to, if there was housing there on the 2nd, 3rd floor, would be more palatable. I don't know if we can do anything with height. Some of the downtown, the commercial downtown I believe has 3 floors, 30 feet high. We're talking 4 floors, 4 stories, 40, 45 foot high, depending on what the use is. So lots of potential. The other thing is that in the comments, we don't know what the plans are going, because we haven't seen the objective standards. I don't know what the objective standards call for. We have a waiting period between now and December 24th. If we reject this specific item, then you have till December 24 or January 24 to implement the new standards for mixed use. We don't know what those mixed uses is going to entail. I'd like to know more about that. So that would be ideal why the mixed use, as Kate mentions, would be a good segue. Thank you.
I'll go ahead and go next if, yeah. This is a hard one. I'm also live fairly close to Rancho, go there probably 2 to 3 times a week. My daughter growing up would go there and get yogurt and do whatever and still goes there now when she's home in town. But the reality is we don't have a choice here, in my mind. And I appreciate what everyone's saying about, yes, I'd love to keep mixed use there. I'd love to have Andronico's there or something like it. But if we don't do this, we are playing with fire with the state. And we could wind up in a builder's remedy. And to me, that is a risk that is just too much to take. And then we would have carte blanche throughout the city, not to mention fines, not to mention reduced funding for traffic projects. So in my mind, as much as all of us hate this, and it's been a horrible 2-year process to get here and to make hard decisions, I think we have to support it, and I will be voting to support it. We can do what we can to try to mitigate it, but I think to do anything kicking the can down the road is just a big mistake, and I can't support that personally. One thing I would like to know, Nick, it was mentioned that it's possible to put 237 units there, but realistically, we're only counting that we'll get 82. What accounts for the big difference there and why? Why would a developer do that?
So the 200 number threshold, we also, as a part of the housing element, have assessed development trends throughout the city. And so, for example, the CN district, the development trends that has been most recently in the last several years has been a 39 unit per acre average, even though so that's essentially the development trend of what private development is looking to achieve in recent years. So using the 39 per unit kind of threshold is kind of how we, deduce down, what we think is a maximum capacity when you have no density control, which is the example for CN. But then a realistic capacity is what we would anticipate a development to yield based on the potential of portions of Rancho leaving to be continuing on, even though potentially part of the development might want to be segmented, essentially, like what was previously mentioned by myself last year and then a speaker mentioned today. So it doesn't mean that the entire plaza has to be bulldozed and redeveloped. There could be some type of unification of portions of the building that could be removed, where housing then would be added, and that's how that number in the 80s was configured, to be able to have a realistic capacity for the potential that there might not be a full scrape and build on the entire site.
And from an economic standpoint, for any developer today going in, would they rather build all housing, or would they rather do a mixed-use development economically? What's their incentives?
Realistically, that's kind of shifted in the last several years. So mixed use prior to the changes that have happened in the Housing Crisis Act of 2019 kind of changed the game in the last 4 years, because it's now provided developers a certain level of certainty. So really, it's kind of the prerogative of a developer is, do they want to have the mixed use portfolio, essentially, or do they want a standalone residential product? I will say from consultation with some interested developers, for areas in our downtown, is the mixed use does seem quite attractive to them because of the high yield per square footage for commercial real estate. While though there is then the ongoing constant revenue stream from the residential, because there's oftentimes in commercial real estate the break in the chain of the flux of funds. So we have been relayed from our, obviously folks in the development world. So again, it ends up being their prerogative, but the Housing Crisis Act of 2019 has provided a certain level of certainty where the Housing Accountability Act left off for just housing, where now it's the blend of the mixed use product type, which was reinforced, which is a 2/3 split. So a mixed use development as defined by state law is 1/3 of the total square footage is for commercial and 2/3 is for the residential. And then that qualifies under what we commonly just quickly say the HAA or the Housing Accountability Act, and then all of the provisions that build upon it from the Housing Crisis Act. So that's the level of certainty that they're looking for.
Okay, thank you. Those are my comments, so.
Okay. So I was on the commission during the design guidelines, objective design guidelines, as well as the housing element, the entire process. So I thought this was kind of a slam dunk tonight. So I think that if residents are concerned about adding residential to ranch, and I think also it's something that can be done regardless of the housing element. A developer could have put residential. If it's a question of adding housing to Rancho, I'm not gonna, get rid of that. But I do think that what some of the residents have brought up, certain things like requiring an environmental review, requiring a traffic analysis, setback from the creek and single-family residential, all of that, if a developer were to propose a project, that would be done. That is not something that would not be done. That would be done 100%. I do think that some of the things that were a majority of commercial space on the ground floor, a plan to keep certain stores open during the construction process so that the neighborhood can. I think those are important, and I think that some of those things could be brought to So I think if that's an option for us to potentially have a study session this year to kind of go over certain things, not everything that was brought up, because like I said, certain things I do think that it's in our best interest to have a couple of items that were brought up tonight and not decided tonight, but to mention that to the city council so that they can plan a study and that we can listen to these concerns before a project is ever proposed. So that would be my comments on that. But I do think that everything that is being proposed tonight that's it.
I'm going to second everything Maris just said. We have our hands tied, and I'm sorry, you people, I'm really angry at the Daily Post because they lied to everybody. The article was a falsehood. There's no project. There's one person in the world who will decide what happens at Rancho, and that's the person who owns the property. That's it. When that person decides to build, if that person decides to build, then a project will come to us, and we will have to look at it. We have, as Maris and the others have pointed out, a ton of regulations about what can happen, what they can do. There are all kinds of conditions of development that will be established once a project is approved, including much of what you have talked about. Okay? We don't do that in advance. We do that when the project comes to us, and that's part of the process. We can't tie the hands. The state has made this very clear. And I just want to emphasize this. We don't get to raise any constraints on residential development, period, end of discussion. They will come and take it away from us if we try. That's the fact. Is it a good thing? Most of us don't think so, but that's the law. And we cannot put rules in place in advance that will be constraints on residential development. What we had to do, what the city had to do, was to identify every square inch of Los Altos that was not already occupied by housing and tell the state what that was. That's what the housing element update did. That doesn't mean it will be developed. It doesn't mean anything except that it could be developed. Will it be developed? Don't know. Should it be developed? The state doesn't care. That's it. That's reality. It's 2023. Mayberry is dead. Okay? Sorry. Okay? And I want to add one other thing as somebody who lives on El Camino Real. It's not an infinitely expansible space. It's been developed. You can talk about putting stuff on El Camino Real. There's no place to put it. It's already been approved and developed. Now it has to go other places. And Rancho is prime territory for that. Woodland is prime territory for that. Sorry about it, but that's reality. That's what we have to contend with. We do not, we, this commission, the city council, we do not have the power, the jurisdiction, or the authority to change that. That's it. So I'm with Maris. I thought this was going to be a 15-minute meeting. We have to approve this language. That's it. Okay? So.
Thank you.
Wait, hang on, can I say? Okay, so, I mean, there's a lot of, I think you guys have made good points, but, so the state has mandated that we reinvent ourselves, and we have to change the zoning codes to match.
Commissioner Disney, can you use your microphone more closely?
We have to change the zoning to match the programs that are in the approved housing element. But we don't have to do any more than what we promised the state, okay? And there's nothing that prevents us from putting together mitigation measures that protect the neighborhoods, ensure that, harm is minimized, and at the same time doesn't add constraints on the production of residential development. So I think we probably have to approve, in some form what is being proposed, but I don't think we can, I think we can look at other things to help mitigate the impacts. I think we can look at what do we want to do with buffering, street trees, how do we want to mitigate noise, light, fencing, those sorts of things, because I'm afraid that, if we don't have, if we don't look at the development standards around landscaping, noise, light, and fencing, we're going to be looking at development that is not harmonious with the community. So I think those, the ordinances around like noise and light, I think they were crafted in a time when we didn't have these kinds of high-density projects. So I think we need to take a deep dive into all the things that we can put in place that don't limit development, but will protect the neighbors.
I think that's a different discussion than what we have tonight. Tonight, I think if you appropriately point out, we are implementing what we have to do.
But also, I think that, I agree that mitigation is important, but I think we have and that was already extensively looked at. So I think if we compare the objective design standards, for instance, the limiting car entrances and exits on Foothill, that was something that was brought up. A phased plan to keep certain stores open throughout, making sure that you don't just take away.
Yeah, and we spent, I think it was prior to your time on the commission, on the objective design standards, a huge amount of time was spent on that.
Yeah.
So I understand you might want to have different considerations for specific projects, but to go back and revisit all of that when it was just finished recently seems inappropriate. But,
So yeah, that's my concern with specific mitigation on the building.
but I think we need to focus
yeah.
on our job tonight.
Yes.
And our job tonight, and we can bring that up in a study session or do something else, our job tonight is, are we going to implement what we told the state we were going to implement? And unless people have further comments, I say we get on with it.
I'm prepared to make a motion.
Okay.
Okay. And this, let me clarify, Nick and Jolie, the motion at present would be solely with respect to chapter 14.40, is that correct?
Yes,
Exhibit F,
so
right.
you can, it's for Appendix F, because
Right.
that's how it is attached to the report. And,
It's page 49 for anyone.
yeah,
And
and so,
it's chapter 14.40.
yes,
Okay.
exactly.
All right, so I'm prepared to make a motion then based on that, okay? Then I'm recommending consideration and adoption of ordinance number 2023 whatever, amending chapter 14.40, attachment F to the report of the Los Altos Municipal Code, chapter 14.40 of the Los Altos Municipal Code to implement the programs 3B, 3C, 3F, 3G, and 3N as they may be applicable to that chapter of the sixth cycle housing element. Okay?
I'm really sorry, but was your motion just on the CN? That's just-
14.40 is the CN district,
Okay,
yes.
sorry, I'm
Yes.
having
And
a
it's-
hard
It's
time
attachment
reading there.
F, chapter
49.
14.40
Yeah, I
of the
got it.
municipal code, which is the CN district.
Okay.
I will second.
Okay, so I have a request. Would you entertain an amendment to strike the language that says residential only?
No, we can't.
What do you
We'll be-
mean we can't? He said we can.
Well, I suggest the answer is no, I will not entertain that amendment. And the reason is that I don't think the state would actually allow us to do it.
Okay, would you agree to an amendment that would request that the council authorize the planning commission to look at specific mitigation measures for Rancho that would further protect the neighboring parcels while not impeding, not creating constraints to development?
I think we can propose that.
That's a separate
Yeah.
thing. It would not be, it's not part of the resolution. The resolution is to recommend what's been recommended. That's a separate issue. It can be, we can do another resolution about that. We can make a recommendation, but that would not be part of this motion, no. But that's a separate issue. It's off the point of the resolution. The resolution is either we recommend it or we don't recommend it, okay?
I mean, ultimately, that would be, the council could decide that when they see this, this month. And so, I mean, I guess,
It's not part of this action.
yeah,
It's
but I
separate.
think that the notes will be given to the council and they can see if they want us to do that. I agree with you. I think there's no harm in having that study session, but I don't think it's for us to be part of this measure. I think we have to leave it to the council.
Right. And I am very hesitant, trained to be very hesitant of any speculative, at this point, it would be speculative. Any speculative thing,
Can
that's
the
exactly
commission, can the
a
commissioners clarify for me and the city attorney, because we were just responding to something with the city council liaison about what the potential amendment is, because there might be a conflict with what is actually before the commission, as well as the authority that's been directed from the city council.
I
Sorry,
I
we didn't
rejected
hear.
the potential
Oh, okay.
amendment.
Yeah.
so-
Sorry, we just
so-
wanted to
Right
double
now, I
check.
think we're looking at a clean vote.
Right, it's a clean
And
vote.
then there might be follow-up action,
Okay.
but
We're-
a clean
we're-
vote.
I was quoting the language of the resolution, okay, with respect only to attachment F, section 14.40. And it's a straight up or down?
Okay.
Okay, on that, okay.
So why don't we take a vote on that?
Commissioner Disney,
No.
Commissioner Roach,
Well, I want to vote no, but I'm really concerned that if, by doing so, it's going to have negative impacts on the housing element. So I'm going to vote yes.
Commissioner Steinle,
Yes.
Commissioner Ahi,
Yes.
and finally Commissioner Mensinger.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Vote passes.
Great, thank you. I'm going to suggest we take about a 5-minute break. We'll bring Joe back in, and we'll move on to the other topics.
Okay.
So let's reconvene at, by this clock, 9:15.
Was that me or somebody else? Okay.
So what was the vote?
Well, we voted on 1420.
We could clear, let people get back to work.
I mean, because it should not be allowing residential only. It should have mixed use.
Okay, could everyone who's not a commissioner please go take a seat? Eric.
Okay, sorry.
We're calling the meeting back.
Chair, can I actually have 2 more minutes because I've been answering questions? I need to use the restroom still. Sorry.
Okay, you get 2 more minutes of talking. Kate, I know this is hard for you. It's hard for all of us, but.
Well, we
Okay, let's reconvene the meeting. It's 9:19 by the slow City Hall clock. Okay, we're moving on. We are at full strength again. And Nick, do you have one you want to do next? How do you want to handle it?
Jolie, this is why we don't sit together at city council. I guess temperature check, is there any specific appendix, though, that any of the 6 commissioners have like a lot of thought or requested things that they're going to want to discuss a little bit more in depth? Because I know some of them are pretty straightforward, but I do know that there might be some that stand out as stuff that wants in-depth discussion specific to certain districts as a whole.
I have a couple questions, but I wouldn't say they're in-depth.
I'm prepared to make a motion.
Okay, my quick question.
I have a question about R3 zone, but whenever you want to take it.
I have one on multifamily R3 as well. My quick question is, why are you eliminating the landscaping requirement?
What was the question?
Why are you eliminating the landscaping requirement, if I read this right?
For which district?
R3. Hold on, find my note here. I think it was R3. Oh, wait.
No, there was
No.
something, it was R3-5, landscaping was removed.
I was just curious why that was.
So R3, is it R31 that you're talking about?
I think.
There's a lot of
Yeah,
R3s.
I'm sorry, it's code 1418.080. page 22 of the package.
You're referring to subsection 070 and the side yards?
Oh, 08, well, actually 080, but.
Okay. So the 5 foot abutting the rear property line shall be landscaped according to the plan approved by the building and planning department and shall be permanently maintained by the property owner. So just by virtue of the fact that it said building and planning department, and then also shall be maintained by the property owner. So anything that's private property is, in the city of Los Altos for maintenance wise is required to be maintained pursuant to the property maintenance section and miscellaneous provisions in the zoning code or in the municipal code. The landscape, specifically the buffering requirements, that's something that is actually handled in different portions of the code. Ever since we adopted like the MWELO requirements for actual provisions for landscaping. So this is just an old standalone portion of individual side yard and rear yard setbacks that before the city ever had any standalone blanket landscaping requirements.
So it's a cleanup.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Can I follow up on that? Isn't our 3-5 Los Altos Square and North San Antonio?
Yes.
Okay. Likelihood that this will ever apply to those, like approximately.
Yeah. So the way that HCD required for this specific program was modify standards in R3 zoning districts. It was a blanket requirement for all R3 zones because there's so many segmented, I think it's 3 or 4 different R3 zones that it's just, there are little tweaks here and there about what's a different requirement. A lot of times that's what, from looking at the history of R3 is they almost could have been as standalone PUDs actually, by the way that they were very small sections of it changed, specific to each individual development pattern that wanted to occur. Rather though we increased or included it in the code as a standalone zoning ordinance versus a PUD.
Yeah, I had a question about the R3 districts. So in the housing element, program 3.n talks about all R3 districts having to be 35 feet and 3 stories. And as I went through the edits, that was true for the R3-4.5, but for many of the other ones, it was 36 feet and 3 stories instead of 35. And I did, Director Zorns and I communicated about this earlier. I did go back and check program 3.b of the housing element, which references 36 feet and 3 stories, but that was for Main and State Street, which is an R3. So should they all be 35 feet or should they be 36 feet or random, whatever makes sense for an individual zone?
So I hate to say this, but I am not the only person subject to error, and neither is HCD. And I do believe that they erroneously probably missed this one section because they required us to change the 35 foot to 36 foot as a part of the requirement that was originally proposed for the downtown building height ones.
Right.
That's included in 3B.
Right.
So my actual intent was to actually allow it to be 36 feet because that's what is allowed in 3B in order to allow for the 36-foot height limit for the 3 stories in order just for easier application throughout the code.
Okay, so they should be 36, and then one exception to that was R3-1, which was specified at 40 feet and 4 stories. So again, program 3N talks about all R3 districts. So is R3-1 a special case? I'm not trying to trip anybody up. I'm just trying to make sure we have clean heights.
So R3-1 does have a greater significant land area than like R3-5, as Commissioner Steinle has pointed to.
Okay.
The code already actually, as it is today, allows for 35 feet in height as it is. So essentially there would be no change to the R3-1. And if we're wanting to be able to, with the intent of the housing element, create additional housing opportunities where folks would likely be more likely to have redevelopment, again, we need to create the regulatory environment that would influence that. So that would be somewhat of a, let's sweeten the pot for that specific district. However, we could just turn it to 36. I highly doubt that will ever spark redevelopment of that site.
I just didn't want us to go against what the housing element program 3.n said. So either way is fine. I just, what would you suggest? Do 36 for all of them except for R3-1?
That would be my recommendation, and that was my intent for
Okay.
tonight's ordinance.
That's what it is.
That's what is?
It is 36 feet proposed for all that are 3-1.
Yes, except the housing element says 35 feet. So it was just, I think it was a typo with the 35 feet. So I think we're good. My last question is about the large daycare, which is 14.80.060G. I'll give you a second to find that, Director Zorns.
So that, if you want to finish your statement, there's actually state law that the city attorney will speak to.
Oh, okay.
Specific about large family daycares.
Yeah, they changed the rule that we can't require use permits. I can look it up.
Okay, I just, it was striking the language of the list of things that required conditional use permits. And a resident had brought that up in one of the letters to the commission, and it wasn't clear to me why we were striking that, but it's state law we're adhering to. Okay.
Yeah, the numbers just grew and grew, 6 or fewer, 8 or fewer, 12 or fewer, and then they just got rid of it. So it's now a state license.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a state license, and it's considered a protected group pursuant to state law. So that's why now local jurisdictions do not have regulating authority over those specific uses.
I just wanted our residents to know we do read the letters that they send in, all of them, and the phone calls and the text messages and the stopping us on the street. So we do pay attention to that stuff. That's all my questions. Thank you.
See if this works now. A little confusion in my appendix E for R3-1. It says it has a maximum of 40 feet of height and 4 stories.
That's the proposed change, Commissioner.
Okay, thank you. Sorry.
I have a question. Earlier this evening, you said we're not changing any densities. For R3 4.5, the density is 9.7 dwelling units per acre, and the current zoning says that the site area may be 9,000 square feet, and you can have two dwelling units on that, which I think gives you the 9.7 dwelling units per acre. So if you change that to the site area shall be 7,000 square feet, and you can put 2 dwelling units on a 7,000 square foot lot, then your density changes to 12.44 dwelling units per acre, which is a 28% increase. So why is that something that the staff proposed?
So we don't have to, we don't actually have to change the maximum or the density requirements if we have essentially the change in the lot area. So sorry, I started hearing the ringing. So it's something that we have other programs that have been built in. That's why we we're folding in the 5 programs because we're going to be touching all of these chapters of the ordinance. But specifically to, and you were saying about, I'm sorry, the 3 R3 4.5, right? That's
Right.
which one you were talking about. Is so there's the 2 family dwelling units with not more than 1 family per of 9,000 square feet, and then a minimum of the 9,000. Then it talks about site area. So it's just considered another kind of potential limitation on the creation of additional housing. So it's something that was factored in, is that we have these lot sizes or site area sizes, so it's interchangeable, that could warrant a reduction further in that was talked about in the housing element. And so that's why it was included as a part of tonight's ordinance change.
Okay, but
So-
it is a change to the density. I mean, effectively, it's a change to the density. And it's not something we have to do. It's just something that got proposed. It's not, I didn't see any goal in the housing element that would require that we do this.
Well, so because we have some lots that are going to be essentially considered like legal non-conforming, where it's that they're just a hair too small to be able to warrant the 2-unit development as standalone units. It was also something that was looked at with our SB9. So this is a little bit of a kind of a trick of the trade, is creating the regulatory environment in our local ordinance to allow for them to adhere to local ordinance and not utilize SB9 regulations, which is, again, another open-ended kind of umbrella that would allow them to get a little bit further than what they would allow under the exact zoning district. So you're right, it's not explicitly allowed. I will not challenge that, but we then will most likely see more and more SB9 deployment with those provisions that were allowed.
Refresh my memory, what's SB9?
SB9 is allowance of a lot split with 2 primary units, and in addition to 2 accessory dwelling units. So you can turn a single family lot into a 4-unit subdivision essentially.
So these lots, this R3 4.5, would not, if they would not benefit from SB9?
I mean, they eventually potentially could, but it's highly unlikely when the lots are going to get that, when you're getting down to 7,000 square feet a lot. But so again, you're creating that regulatory framework, is that then they could utilize just our basic zoning standards versus the SB9 standards, which are in general more generous.
But can you use both? Can someone say, I have a 7,000 square foot lot in R3 4.5 and I want to do a lot split?
There's the potential, yes, but that's the whole thing, is this reduction in site area requirement was not previously available. So that's why the state took over and created the regulatory framework from the state level that now allows them to circumvent local zoning law. That's why SB9 came into effect, was to be able to create the regulatory framework from the top down versus the local initiative to be able to allow it.
Can I add something here? A little history. 3.4-4.5 is all duplexes.
Oh, I didn't know that.
It's the land that time forgot. It's back in 2019, the council had to create this section as it exists because there had been no design review at all for it, because somehow the city forgot it. It just wasn't, there were no rules at all. And the gentleman came in, a very nice guy, spent a ton of money and a ton of time trying to fix something up, and there were no rules to allow him to do it. So the city in 2019 finally came up with this. Now it's being modified somewhat, but it's all a bunch of little very nice duplexes, and that's all.
Okay, thank you.
So, and that's
I'm not
one reason
familiar
why
with it,
things are
so-
the way they are.
Okay.
Yeah, that's actually
It's-
why the specific purpose for R3 4.5, it's actually what we would call Stevens Place and Marshall Court. That's actually the little kind of enclave that Commissioner Steinley's actually referring
Across from the crossings, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's just that little cluster, a little village, if you
Right.
will. And they're lovely, and everybody, they're some of them are rented out and that sort of thing. But it's a special little place, and it's sort of like everything else. Once it's built up, it's going to stay built up. But this is, SB 9 might happen if somebody wanted to knock one of them down. That's about it. Right. So,
Okay.
you know, but it was a special place. So.
Okay, any other questions or comments from commissioners? I think I heard somebody said they'd make a motion.
I said I would make a motion.
Is there mic on?
Huh?
Mike?
I think it's on, yes?
Yeah, it is.
Okay. Maybe if I faced it, it would actually work, you know. Things we learned in elementary school. Okay, so I'm going to make a single motion that'll include all of the sections except the one that we already voted on, and it'll be essentially the same that I did before. So I'm going to recommend consideration and adoption of ordinance number 2023-whatever, amending chapters 14.16, 14.18, 14.20, 14.22, 14.24, 14.44, 14.48, 14.52, 14.54, and 14.80 of the Los Altos Municipal Code to implement programs 3B, 3C, 3F, 3G, and 3N as applicable of the sixth cycle housing element update.
Friendly amendment? Can we include the 36-foot R3 language that we discussed?
You know, as subject to the small editorial corrections that were proposed, yes. So to bring everything into sync.
I will second.
Okay.
Just to clarify, are you saying that R3-1 should be 36 feet?
Yes. I believe Director Zorn said that should not be 36 feet. Maybe.
What are you saying?
What he said.
I think all except for R3-1 should be 36, and R3-1 is 40 and 4 stories.
As it is written with the correction to bring everything into sync, which was the whole idea of this in the first place.
Correct.
Okay, I accept the amendment. You've seconded. Okay, both of those. Okay.
All right, we're ready for a vote. Commissioner Disney,
Yes.
Commissioner Beninato,
Yes.
Commissioner Roach,
Yes.
Commissioner Steinle,
Yes.
Vice Chair Ahi,
Yes.
and Chair Mensinger.
Yes,
It's a unanimous
Okay.
recommendation.
thank you. We are done with that public hearing now. Any commissioner reports or comments? Okay.
I have one comment, which I didn't get a chance with, this housing element took an enormous amount of time, and I just wanted to express my appreciation to Director Zorns and everyone else on staff, and with Lisa Wise Consulting. It was several years of pain and extended pain in some cases, and
I would say ongoing pain.
yeah, perhaps ongoing pain, but just
And
wanted to
some
say thank you on behalf of the residents.
Thank you.
I'd like to add, and this sort of passed us by earlier, but the housing element update compliance, I think Nick and Stephanie and Jolie, Jonathan on behalf of the council, okay, it did a great job, and we couldn't be happier. So it's been, there's more to come, yes, okay.
And I'll second both of those.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just, it's spectacular, and it was the best news that we could have had.
Well, and also I'll give the special shout out since Eric is in Vermont and asleep. His special guidance with housing issues has been very beneficial for me and Jolie. So it's good to have him still available to us, even though he's asleep now.
I'll accept the friendly amendment, yes, I definitely want to include him.
Moving to potential future agenda items, Nick, is there anything you want to highlight? And I think we should do something with the things that Kate mentioned today and Maris mentioned in terms of trying to come up with some things that can help to mitigate some of the things we had to approve tonight. And if you could suggest the best way you see of doing that.
Yeah, so the access on Foothill and just access in and out of properties obviously is something that we should look at as a holistic requirement in the city. And it's something that would be twofold because it's something that the CSC would also need to look at since they're concerned with transportation networks. I actually would like to do potentially some recon essentially with Santa Clara Fire with regards specifically kind of just being like, hey, if we were to close this off, what would you guys do? Or what would you require? Because there is a requirement for 2 access points for anything that has residential products attached to it as a development. So I'd kind of like to see what they would say. There's also, specifically for that site, there's a very significant, obviously, traffic analysis that would have to be done. And that always does somewhat take into access because of how they're going to, clear out that that parcel. So I think I need a kind of, as Stephanie says in the office, is I need a noodle on it.
Fair enough. Okay, but I think that's something that several members expressed an interest in saying, how can we do some things that will mitigate the impact should Rancho get developed even prior to something being submitted? Is that fairly safe?
Definitely. I
Yeah.
think the goal is to do this before something's
Yeah.
submitted, because it's terribly unfair to come in after the fact and say, oh, gee, we want category 1 trees and different kind of fencing. I mean, I think if we could just do a deep dive sooner rather than later to try to mitigate impacts.
I think,
But a lot of this would all be done when a project came in. So
Yeah,
I keep getting baffled, like, why are we going to have some fictitious project that we think is going to come in and we think we need to mitigate? We don't even have a project. And so, I mean, we can look at access and stuff like that, but I think we could
you
put
would.
in place stuff, and then the developer would say, no, that's hindering
Yeah, I think
housing.
for a massive development that potentially would go on Rancho, I think you would have a lot of things that are considered in the application that's submitted to the city. So I think that you were saying a deep dive. I think maybe a shallow dive, maybe just looking at certain things once Nick, I think, and the staff kind of maybe take a look. But I don't think there's a ton of items, but I think there's a couple things that just to keep residents, give them peace of mind. I don't think it's going to be any harm to do that.
So I'm also going to at least just inform, just for information sharing, so the commission understands this. So the sustainability division, which is now back in development services, they've been working on the tree protection ordinance. So for example, I was out at Rancho Shopping Center today, for an example, and we have very mature trees that are out on site that would, what we would call in our tree protection ordinance is what contributes to the tree canopy for our city's urban forest. So when we're talking about, and it's not actually a tree for tree, that's actually a very old way of thinking. We actually have to look at what is the actual canopy and what is being provided by the canopy. So if you were to go from a gigantic oak that, spans 60 feet in width, someone might be able to actually replace it with 4 trees that are actually going to provide the same amount of canopy and actually will have a longer lifespan. And so that's something that, again, right now I can think of 4 massive trees just by, my recollection of being on site today, where that would warrant a variety of specific category trees to be replanted on that site, in addition to our lot coverage of pervious and impervious surfaces, which we look at for every design review application for mixed use and multifamily housing development. So there's a lot of provisions that are already built in, but it would be on a project by project basis.
Okay, I think that is it, and if so, we stand adjourned at 9:43. Thank you, everyone.